I want to do a brief interactive presentation on something that I find very fascinating. What I think is a very incredible piece of American history, and just some incredible people were born out of this particular movement, which took place in the middle of the 19th century here in the United States. So everybody has a copy of some Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Ralph Waldo Emerson is the godfather of a philosophical movement that took place in America. It was an era of unique literature titled the American Transcendentalist Movement. So the American Transcendentalist Movement, it, um, it was a philosophical and literary movement that emerged in the 1830s and the 1840s in New England. We're talking about Massachusetts, we're talking about Connecticut, that whole area. And essentially, what you had happening at the time was you had Eastern thought, Eastern mysticism, beginning to find its way to the English language. So, where our country was primarily a Christian nation, you essentially had these Eastern ideas that were beginning to reach the English language in the 19th century, and those were starting to inspire these different movements at the time. This would kind of go into the Victorian era, where you had like the discovery of Egypt would take place shortly after this, the archaeological digs in Egypt, and then we would have this huge cultural wave of, they called it Egyptomania, where everybody was getting into the Egyptian stuff. So the 19th century was a really fascinating time for educated and interested people in the United States. So we have this movement, the American Transcendentalism movement, in America, up in New England, and you've got Ralph Waldo Emerson, you've got Margaret Fuller, you've got Henry David Thoreau, and we'll talk about a few of these people. Now, the focuses of this philosophical tradition are individualism, nonconformity to the society that you live in, thinking for yourself, essentially. Can you guys see? Okay, cool. Thinking for yourself. Intuition, trusting your intuition, not having to go to a book for truth. Trusting that God, this is an extremely spiritual movement, trusting that God can speak through your own mind and that you don't necessarily have to go to a book to hear God's word. And the inherent goodness in humanity and nature. Now, tomorrow, Brian is going to kind of talk about some of the philosophers that would argue about, are humans good, are humans bad, and how that would turn into the American Constitution. But the American Transcendentalists, they believe that humans were inherently good and that nature is inherently beautiful and that there is this shimmering beauty to life and everything around us. And that was important to them. So the godfather of this movement is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He wrote Self-Reliance. He was an essayist. He wrote all the essays in that book that you have. That book has history, self-reliance, experience, the poet, the oversoul. An incredibly transformative series of essays. So Ralph Waldo Emerson is the godfather of this movement. He preaches intuition, individualism, a relationship with nature, and most importantly, which is kind of the rebellious side of this whole thing, nonconformity. Super, super big on not conforming to the standards of the society that you live in. That is essentially the essence of the self-reliance essay, and that's essentially the the hard stance that these guys take on society is that, like, do not conform. Conformity is the death of your manhood, the essence of what they believed. So next we have, you guys are probably familiar with these two guys. If not, hopefully that changes. So Emerson has a protege, Henry David Thoreau. Henry David Thoreau, he wrote Walden Pond, a very popular piece of literature. Thoreau was Emerson's student. He was the heir, the carrier of this philosophical movement. And actually, Walden Pond, which is where Thoreau would move to write Walden, Emerson owned that land. So Thoreau would move onto Emerson's land, build a cabin, live in it for 2 years, and write about that experience. We'll talk about that later, but that's a cool story. But Thoreau obviously took Emerson's writings about self-reliance very seriously, because if you're going to go build a cabin with your bare hands and live in it for 2 years, you probably took what your mentor said to heart. So he went and lived this to the fullest. He took this philosophy and he embodied it quite absolutely. And for that, we honor him. So the main tenets of this philosophical lifestyle, and I'm just throwing these out there. I don't even necessarily agree with all these, but we should examine the philosophy and see what we like and what we don't like. So the main tenets of the transcendental philosophy. Number one, nature and people are inherently good. This is something that's argued over quite a lot. I'm sure we know people who we don't think are too good, and I'm sure at times we've all had moments where we don't think we're that good, But transcendentalists, human beings are inherently good, people are inherently good, nature is inherently good. There is a shimmering beauty that is moving through all of this, and it's pure and it's beautiful and it is of God. Society and its institutions tend to corrupt that goodness. It's an important part. Trust the purity of your soul, your thoughts, your mind, over ideas that come to you externally. Trust yourself. It's hard. It's really hard sometimes to trust ourselves. But the Transcendentalists, they want us to trust ourselves. They believe that we can trust ourselves. And they believe that if we purify ourselves, if we live right, if we live close to nature, then we can trust that whatever is coming through our minds is real, is of God, and we don't have to doubt it. So, number two, self-reliance and individualism. So, you are not born broken. You're not born lacking. You're not born separated from God. These are the philosophies of these mystics. You have everything you need within yourself. It might not all be flipped on. All the switches might not be on. You might have to do some stuff to get things firing, but everything that you need is within yourself. If you work on bringing that to life, if you work on living in a way that activates that goodness, then you can become this spring, this well of life, of truth, of wisdom. Independence of thought, spirit, and action. Individualism is the highest virtue. To the point where in self-reliance, Emerson even writes about how when you meet somebody who is truly living in an original way, like you can tell, like this person is just being them. Even if they're doing something that's malevolent or bad, there's still something that's like attractive about it. There's still something like beautiful about that person living their life in a way that is completely separate from the social standards or the influences around them. So when we talk about the independence of action, thought, and spirit, it doesn't necessarily mean that those are all positive. You could have somebody who's thinking negatively independently, but they still are living from this internal truth, and there is still something unique about that. Be wary of conformity. Being your true self matters more than meeting the expectations of others. So again, conformity, that's the huge lesson here. Have to be a nonconformist. A very spiritual movement. These gentlemen were not atheists by any means. So the spiritual virtues exist over the material virtues. Spiritual reality is more important than the physical material one. And again, you can kind of see if you've studied like Eastern mysticism, this is kind of where that literature is kind of influencing how these guys were thinking. This transcendental, transcending above the material world and lifting our minds to a place that's more pure, closer to God. Direct personal experience of the divine in nature, art, or contemplation matters more than book knowledge or religious institutions. I think Ernest said something about this last night, right? Ernest was talking about the direct experiences. You can go read the book, but then you have an experience, and that's really real. You know, maybe you have a dream. Somebody comes and speaks to you in a dream. Maybe you are driving down the highway and there's cups on an overpass that shows you the message that you needed to hear at that moment, you know. Those things, those direct experiences with the divine circumstances, those are important to believe in and important to look for. We have to be open to having that experience with the divine. Different people have different ideas of how you can become more in tune with that. Living soberly, whether that's, for some people it's not eating meat, for some people it's not consuming alcohol, for some people it's not gossiping, but this purification process, generally through some sort of self-denial, is kind of traditionally how people have attempted to attain this. Christ's Sermon on the Mount is a sermon of self-denial. To an extreme case. You know, his Sermon on the Mount even says, like, go walk, don't even think about food, it will be provided for you. Like, if you take the Sermon on the Mount seriously, that's really hardcore. But it's about self-denial. So that's the process of like trying to align ourselves with a direct experience with God, and how that is more valuable to us, more personal than reading a book or an institution. So really important to the Transcendentalists. Intuition over reason. So deep truths are grasped through intuition rather than rational analysis. Again, if you're familiar with Eastern thought, you have the idea of a meditation where you're trying to silence the mind. You're trying to meditate into a state where your rational thoughts don't exist. And that to them is a state of spiritual bliss, elevation. So again, just a direct echo of that Eastern influence. You have an inner light. Trust your gut. Trust your instincts. Trust your heart. And the oversoul, this is an important concept here, that we are not isolated, we are connected. Almost like if you imagine the ocean and you take a cup and you scoop a cup of water out of that ocean, that water is temporarily separated from that ocean in a vessel, but that water is of the ocean, it will return to the ocean. It's the same water, it's just having a different experience at that moment. So that's the idea of the oversoul. Some people call this the collective consciousness. It's kind of what it's become in the New Age philosophical circles. But it's the idea that we are, yes, we're in separate bodies, but we are having this illusion of separateness at this moment. In reality, we're more connected than we realize. And perhaps when we die, we will melt back into this giant mass of spiritual bliss. This is what they thought. You're not isolated. You're linked to all other beings. The grass, the trees, everything. Connected deeply and intimately with everything around us. And we live in a temporary illusion. So, nonconformity. You're going to hear that word a lot. Nonconformity and civil disobedience. If society's rules are unjust, it is your duty to resist them. And that means it's not a choice. It's your duty to resist them. Authentic living sometimes means standing against the popular opinion. I would say that if everybody's your friend, if you have no enemies, if you seem to just like what everybody else likes, then it's probably none of y'all because you're here. But if that's kind of the lifestyle that you're caught up in, you're probably just, you're letting your environment influence the entire essence of your life. That's not what Emerson wants you to be. Emerson and Thoreau, they want you to be that salmon swimming upstream. You have a goal, you're going for it. It doesn't matter what people are saying. It doesn't matter what the circumstances look like. You're doing what you want to do for a pure purpose, and you're not going to let anything stop you. And you're driven by that spiritual calling, that spiritual drive. So again, just to kind of cover some of the big points, nonconformity. Refusing to blindly follow social norms or traditions. It doesn't mean that all social norms or traditions are bad. Some of them are great. But you shouldn't follow them blindly just because that's what everybody else is doing. You should do it because it's what you think is right. Self-reliance, believing every man must carve his own path based on his conscience. And that path is different for everybody. We have different gifts, different talents, different duties. So this doesn't mean that we all need to be doing the same thing, but we do all have some sort of an inherent spiritual and moral compass that is pointing in some direction. And we should try to align ourselves with that and trust it. Civil disobedience, willingly breaking unjust laws because moral law is higher than human nature. Thoreau was a huge abolitionist at the time. So this is, he's writing in the 1840s. So a lot of the civil disobedience literature is around abolition. And then romantic idealism, everything is beautiful. Like I said, there's this shimmering, ethereal light passing through everything. That life is not torturous, life is not evil. And, this is perhaps where this philosophy does diverge from the East, because life is not suffering to these guys. Life is beautiful and something to be lived. So we'll talk about two books that are essentially the foundations of this philosophy. You have one of them, Self-Reliance. This was written by Emerson. This is an essay written by Emerson, 1843, I think, 1840s, something like that. And what we'll do is we will go through the main tenets, and then we'll look at some direct quotes from the essay. And then I would invite you to speak up. I don't really intend on this just to be a lecture. This whole time I would really like for us to kind of engage in a Socratic style conversation, kind of like what we did at dinner. So when we get to the quotes, that's where I'd like for you to start thinking about, what you would like to say. If one of them speaks to you, please speak up, share it with the room. I'd love for us to kind of get one of those going. So trust yourself. Your intuition, instincts, and inner voice are the clearest guides to truth. It's not what your parents say. It's not what your church says. It's not what social norms say. It's about that compass inside of us, that moral, spiritual compass, and learning how to connect with that, and learning how to read that, and trusting what that is. You don't need external approval. Thoreau went as far as moving into the woods for 2 years. So how much do you trust yourself? Avoid conformity. Society pressures individuals to fit in, but true manhood means resisting that pressure. I'm not a father, but we have a lot of fathers here. Imagine if you just let your kids go do whatever society wants them to do right now. Where are you going to draw the lines? Draw the lines in our own life, draw the lines in the lives of the people we're responsible for, children. But manhood is about drawing those lines. Conformity weakens the soul. Nonconformity strengthens it. Value originality over consistency. I would say that a good way to understand this is consistency. I would say like habits, the things that we just fall into doing every single day is a good way to change the verbiage there. You must be willing to change, grow, and even contradict yourself. That last one's hard. Emerson in that essay, he talks about how today, speak your truth with hard words. Tomorrow, speak your truth with hard words, even if they contradict themselves. So whatever you are in alignment with, kind of like what Ernest talked about, that alignment, wherever you're at today, don't be afraid to put it out there. Tomorrow, if it's different, great. You changed, you grew. That's the whole process. We shouldn't be the same the whole time.
I have a quote that when I read this earlier in the week, that really hit me hard. That's perfectly right in line with this. It's the other terror that scares us from self-trust is our consistency, a reverence for our past act or word, because the eyes of others have no other data for computing our orbit than our past acts, and we are loath to disappoint them. But why should you keep your head over your shoulder? Why drag about this corpse of your memory, lest you contradict somewhat what you have stated in this or that public place? And that's something I encounter a lot in my life, of who people perceive me as. There is this intrinsic draw to want to persist that, because when people see you rapidly change, they can react confused or angry. But I think the identity is best considered as something that's dynamic instead of stagnant.
There's 12 different versions of you exist in everybody's head in this room right now. None of them are right. Like it's just all these jacked up opinions that are missing information. So, yeah, I mean, that quote is great. I mean, especially if you are, well, I've gone through periods where I wanted to start doing something differently, acting differently, just a big lifestyle change. Like I'm sure we've had periods in our lives where we made drastic changes. And then for me, like when I do that, there's always some people around you who like don't really get it, or maybe they like, you become the butt of some jokes, or they just think it's weird, and you kind of just need to roll it off and just stick to the plan, But yeah, that's like, this is all great for us to talk about here in this room. Like, oh yes, I'm going to go be a nonconformist, not care about what people think. But in practice, it's hard. Like, we're social creatures. So hardwired into us is the desire for social approval, the desire for camaraderie, the desire for brotherhood. So this is more than just like writing this stuff down and doing it. I mean, this is going against your human biological nature, which is, again, where this whole spiritual over the temporal, over the physical kind of shows itself again. It's hard to be a nonconformist.
Just to non-conform for a moment, would you mind going back one screen so I can capture number 2?
Yeah.
Thank you.
What are some signs that you know you're aligned with self? Like if you had to, something Emerson might have said or something more.
For my life, it's just like pure, like vigorous energy. Like I think, have you guys ever had like a project you're working on where like you don't need to sleep? Like you just feel like you have just this infinite energy moving through you and you're sharp, like you're so locked in. That would be my experience personally of when I believe that I'm really like aligned with my compass. If anybody else has something to share.
I think that relates to flow state in psychology, if you're familiar with it. It's being in somewhere between the things that you're comfortable with, your skill set, and things that you don't yet know. You're not too deep in something that you're completely out of your off kilter.
Yeah.
But you're right on the cusp of that, and you get into a state where it's almost like it's coming through you, and you're not even having to think about your actions. It becomes autonomous.
Yeah. Yeah, so that would be my experience with it. If anybody else has ever experienced a feeling, I would say also sometimes my dreams, like I try to pay attention to my dreams and try to listen to them, like your dreams, your dream that got you here.
Yeah.
You know, so I think that our dreams are a window into our subconscious mind. And I would say that if we're having dreams that don't make any sense, or maybe they're, negative, I would say that maybe that would be a sign that we're off kilter. If we're having dreams where things are seemingly being delivered to us, messages, like very lucid, emotional dreams. For me, when I'm having those dreams, I usually feel like my life is on a decent path. Number 4, live authentically and boldly. You were put here to live out your unique purpose, not someone else's plan for you. Some of you maybe have heard the phrase, if you don't have a plan, you are in somebody else's plan. Entrepreneurs are probably very familiar with that.
If you don't have a friend who's the a-hole, you're the... I'm sorry.
Yeah, exactly. So living in alignment with your highest principles, even if it costs you. So that's another question, like what are you willing to sacrifice for this? Conformity is pretty safe and comfortable. Let me just do what everybody else is doing. Don't mind me. I'm kind of just doing my thing. Like, nobody's going to attack you, right? Like, you could just kind of, play the corporate route and just, do all that, play it safe, don't take any risks. You'll probably maybe work out, probably won't have any like extreme victories or extreme losses. You'll kind of just ride it out,
We're kind of hardwired from birth, though. When you look at a child, right, the first time that a child falls down, I don't know if any parents in here remember that, they have that moment when something startles them, they're like, and they look to you and they're like, hey, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to be crying and upset, or is it
Should I be freaking?
Right. And whenever they hit that, the first time they fall off their bike or whatever, it's like, yeah, I'm looking, because if mom's looking, it's gonna be tears.
Yeah.
Right. With dad, you're like, you just go, and they'll be fine. But they learn those responses and that external validation, and that's part of training. I mean, and then look at how we indoctrinate in school and everything else. It's like, hey, you did good, good job, good.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly looking for that. It's safe. It feels comfortable to be like, hey, so I'm with everybody else. I'm good.
Yeah.
To do that is very hard. Some people are more wired for it than others, but
Yeah.
I mean, you've got almost all of society that has made it very comfortable for you to put yourself in a little box, basically, because that's safe.
going back to Christ's Sermon on the Mount, are you willing to be despised?
Yes. Good way to tell it.
Are you willing to be despised? That's what Christ posed to his apostles.
I would love to find some time during this weekend to open up the Bible with anybody that's interested and just go read that specific part of the Bible.
You should. Matthew 5, 6, 7, I think. There's a Bible on the table.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If anybody wants to join me, I'd like to go outside and sit on it.
I'm in.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's powerful. So living in alignment with your highest principles, even if it costs you, what are you willing to sacrifice? Thoreau was willing to go live in some beach shit cabin in the woods for 2 years. You know, what are you willing to sacrifice? Are you willing to sacrifice your Instagram followers? I don't want to lose any followers, dude. I don't want to put it up there. I'm taking my story down, man.
We really know what we're willing to sacrifice. I think we think about what we should sacrifice, but to actually take a step and sacrifice, I think that's where a lot of us fall down. We know it's the right thing to do, but to have the courage to do it is a whole different level of, conviction.
Yeah, or sometimes we don't know, and you know we need to go through that process of aligning to that voice. You know.
There's a song lyric that reminds me of this, like, I'm climbing the mountain even if I can't see the top.
Yeah, just keep going. American Transcendentalism.
It's like
Yeah.
jumping off the cliff and like who's gonna catch you.
Yeah. So these are some quotes from the self-reliance essay. Just some of my favorite that really summarize this idea. It is easy in the world to live after the world's opinion. It is easy in solitude to live after our own. But the great man is he who in the midst of the crowd keeps with perfect sweetness the independence of solitude. It's like we're here on the farm, it's quiet, the birds are chirping, I'm sitting out drinking my coffee, I'm at peace. But on Monday, I'm going to be in Nashville. How do I carry this peace with me back to the city? That's what he's talking about here. How do I not go back to Nashville and become a city boy? So, this is probably my favorite quote from the entire essay. But what's beautiful about this essay, I hope you guys get a chance to read it. I mean, it's so good. Like, you read this slow. Like, this is the type of paper where, like, you read a sentence or two and then you almost need to stop and just think about those words. Like, it's incredibly potent. He was certainly not trying to just fill pages. And again, this is all Ralph Waldo Emerson that we're looking at right now. Again, nonconformity. Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. It's not an option. What lines are you willing to draw in the sand for yourself, for your family, for your friends, for your God? Whoso would be a man must be a nonconformist. And here's a nice one. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the manhood of every one of its members. Franklin kind of talks about this. Ben Franklin, he says that he who would give up liberty for security deserves neither. That's what society is. You sacrifice some of your individuality for the security of the herd. That's just being an animal. Like those cows out there, there's nothing out here really trying to eat the cows besides us, but if there were like black bear or brown bears running around here, if you were in that herd and you strayed away, like that bear's coming after you, but if you're in that herd, you're pretty safe. So
Sometimes it seems like to be a nonconformist or to feel more confident and maybe some things that you wanna take a stand on, having a group of people around you as a support network
1000%.
is really helpful, I think. Try and do it on your own is, I think there's a big barrier that at least I encounter. But to do it with like-minded individuals makes it easier.
I think that that's an amazing point. You know, what's the happy medium between Thoreau and plugging into the matrix is having a group of guys to be nonconformists with. Because then you're not isolating yourself, but you're still living in that spirit of individuality. It's the American Revolution, in essence, the Founding Fathers. That was a brotherhood of nonconformists.
So it's essentially creating your own society as a leader.
Creating your own society as a leader is a way to look at it.
I
Yeah.
think it's important that each individual is self-reliant to a certain degree, though, and that's the key part. Is that instead of having one person who's self-reliant and 4 followers, you have 5 self-reliant individuals can do exponentially more.
Has anyone here read Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged?
No, I've not read it.
I strongly
Pretty good.
I'm gonna read this, you gotta read that.
I have a copy of it. I
Ayn
bought a
Rand's
copy.
Atlas Shrugged. It is essentially the story of men and women, but about producers and people who are standing up against the society norms, deciding to withdraw and create their own experience. And then who is John Galt? And it's an extraordinarily important book. It lays out a lot of sort of libertarian concepts before libertarian thinking was really truly understood, and it's very, 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 very much consistent with this.
I have a problem, like a bad habit of buying books that I never read, and that has become one of those. But I'll read it now.
It's the first book I ever read that after I read it, I went to Amazon and gave a review
Cool.
because I wanted other people to maybe see whatever the hell I had in my mind that thought was important.
Does he cover active meditation as a pathway to discovering what is the path?
So my answer to that would be that being in nature is the meditation. You know, you're not necessarily, I've never come across literature of him saying like, sit down, close your eyes, hum a few times, chant your
That was
ohms.
actually a very mystical and practice that was really frowned on by the church and always has been. And that's why women are burned at the stake for doing this mystic, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I've not come across anything like that type of active meditation, but, you know, to these guys, like going on a walk around the lake would be that meditation. But it wouldn't surprise me if there were some practices like that. If anybody knows of anything, please share. I just haven't come across them talking about
You
it.
would think back then it was far easier to naturally meditate.
Yes.
You didn't have all the distractions that we have, but as we like read it as a group of men, we do have to remind ourselves that we're not living in that era.
Yeah.
And we're in this new era that we have to be more purposeful about being in nature, more purposeful of being without our thoughts, and sometimes those thoughts are going to rise, and recognize which our thoughts are our thoughts or society's thoughts, and distinguishing between the two.
Mm-hmm.
Letting go is not what's necessary.
Yeah,
That's getting into the nonconformity.
absolutely. Yeah, you know, I think like Emerson's ideal man, his Ubermensch is probably a guy who is meditating 24/7. Like everything he does is a meditation.
Everything
You know.
you do can be a meditation.
Exactly, like that's what he's
Taking
saying.
out the garbage to driving down the road.
Yep. So there's this idea that, you know, once you, whatever state you get to through your purification, whatever it is, eventually perhaps we arrive at this state where the lights all come on and, you know, we see the beauty and everything that we had previously not seen.
Well, even in the Bible, there's scripture about incessant prayer, right? Where it's like which I mean, the translation's a little different, but I mean that is kind of like meditation, and they don't
Absolutely.
use meditation so much because it's more of the Eastern construct for it, but they would go commune with nature.
Absolutely,
Commune
yeah.
with God,
Or-
which is very similar to a meditation.
Yep, absolutely. Orthodox monks will sit and they will literally pray all day. Pray, 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 go eat, pray, 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 like constant prayer, constant prayer, constant prayer. What I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. So again, this idea of doing what is true to you. To us, this is all like great, normal, but to mid-19th century America, this is heresy. So, yes, like even what we're seeing now, like this is like no bueno. Emerson got excommunicated. He was a reverend. He got excommunicated from his Christian community. Like this is like the devil's work. You know what I'm saying? So perhaps.
If you went to church in the 90s, like youth groups and stuff, they specifically talked about
Oh yeah.
that New Age movement and meditations and all that kind of stuff and how it was the harbinger of evil.
Yeah. So.
Early hippies right here.
I think about Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Great book. Yep.
It's
Also doesn't mention meditation.
right. And if you think about it, like that,
And it's it said meditation. Where
Yeah.
is the meditation?
Well, you know,
Tell me
it's just
meditation.
inside.
Yeah. That's the
It's what he wrote down when he meditated, though. I mean, meditating is listening.
Yeah.
Praying is speaking. Meditating is listening. So he listened, and then he wrote it all down.
yeah. I mean, it's like the
Vipassana.
the active meditation practice that we are familiar with is pretty much like is pretty much like a purely Eastern. We're talking Hinduism primarily, like that comes from India, Tibet. The idea of sitting down for like 12 hours, like these other cultures, like their meditations were different. That like seated for extended period of time, that is a uniquely Eastern practice, which is very, very popular now. Yeah. Like to an ancient Greek, your meditation was war. Like there were all these different ways. There's all these different, like the idea of to connect to God, you have to sit. Like there's different ways that people have connected to God through history, and we also should see to find our way. Like for me, maybe it's like going on a run or whatever it is, or praying or meditate. Like there's all these different ways to connect to the divine. There's not like one road to it, And I think that Emerson would say that, well, he would say that nature is the universal magnet for sure, but he would probably agree that we are different and that we should try to find that unique aspect of ourself that is a channel to God. But importantly, remembering that nature is the universal exuberant. Like nature just, it works for everybody.
Warren, I've just been reading that first sentence there. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. And I guess the first thing that came to my mind is, what role can God play in that? Because we, as individuals, may not be able to find peace without a reliance on a faith, if that's our choice.
Yeah, so he would say that this word yourself is not excluding God. Like that is God. That we're an extension of God. We're always with God.
Everywhere and in all things. And God, a lot of times the study of nature was actually, even by scientists, were done by men of religion because they were, it was God's
Book of nature.
creation, nothing else. So it was,
Yeah.
it was a testament to God by studying nature.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, God, to these guys, we are not separated from God. Although at times we may do things that isolate us in the illusion a little bit, God is constantly moving through. God is around us and constantly moving through us. And we can try to align ourselves with that voice. He talks about that. He talks about that voice that disappears when you go into society. Like, after this talk, we'll go hit the canoes, walk around, and when you get out there, it's just the wind, And sometimes you have those thoughts that just seem so real and so beautiful and so pure. And then when you go to the city, like that voice just is not there. So that would be the idea of God moving through us and us being able to hear it or not hear it, depending on where we place ourselves. One of the whole purposes of all of this is to hopefully, help everybody in some way get closer to where we can kind of hear that voice, come out on the farm, hang out, be around good guys. Hopefully we're all kind of giving ourselves the space to hear that voice. So what I must do is all that concerns me, not what the people think. So performing our duties with self-fulfilling honor. And so Joe is going to come talk about mythology, and he's going to talk about Greek mythology and the Bhagavad Gita, Hindu religion later. And it's awesome how many, in the talk later, you'll see like all these themes come back up, especially this one. Duty. What is your duty? Perform your duty on earth. Figure out what your duty is. Perform your duty regardless of what the consequences are, regardless of who hates you, regardless of even life or death. Perform your duty because it is your duty. For Scottish Rite Masons in the room, you've heard that said to you in so many different ways. Perform your duty. The honors of life are the rewards of work. Work your duty. So performing our duty is self-fulfilling honor. So now, how long have I been yapping for? All right. We'll talk about Henry David Thoreau, who again, this is the predecessor to Emerson. He was Emerson's pupil. And Thoreau, like I said, he took this Emerson stuff seriously. He said, all right, dude, I'm going to move on to your land. I'm going to build a cabin with my hands and live in it for 2 years. So this is what he did. This is in like New Haven, I think it's like New Haven, Connecticut area, I believe. Emerson.
Okay.
Yes.
Trying to make sure.
Yeah. So he goes, essentially what happens is 1845, Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau, moved out to the woods on Walden Pond. And he built a small cabin, certainly smaller than this room. I think it was about the size of this rug. And he lived in it for 2 years. And he wrote about it. So he wanted to strip his life down to the bare essentials. And we'll read a quote here in a minute, but he wanted to make sure that when it came to him sitting on his deathbed, he wasn't going to look back and realize that he missed something or that he was tricking himself. So he wanted to strip it all down and get down to the nitty-gritty and see what life was really all about. And for him, that was going into the woods, building a cabin, and as he describes it, living deliberately. He rejected materialism, routine, and social expectations, reconnect with nature, truth, and himself. So, you guys should order a copy of Walden. It's a fantastic read, very grounding. It's like 180 pages, 200 pages maybe. It's not too long.
I wonder if back in that window of time, it feels like the distance between you and me deciding today to go into the woods and try to do this same thing
Extreme.
is a greater distance than 1845 and deciding to go do this.
You know,
I'm not sure what that says anything, but it's just observing.
well, we live in like all these like technological structures now. So like, Thoreau didn't have his bills on auto pay, right? Like, so it was absolutely a different time for sure. However, we should perhaps, if we're serious, what are we willing to sacrifice, Mark? Maybe we should, let go of those excuses and go build that cabin, We could come up with 1,000 reasons why it wouldn't work for us. Thoreau could have done the same thing. But if we're rationally analyzing it, Yeah, it's totally different. Totally different. He didn't, building permits to build his cabin. He didn't have to go tug on Freddie O'Connell's coat to get his permits.
He might have started with some basic skills that some of us don't have.
Yeah, he would. Yeah, he was a handyman. He would go and if you read the book, he goes and just does random shit around town to buy bread and he's just a handyman, carpenter. So most men waste their lives on trivial concerns. Simplicity, self-reliance, and a deep relationship with nature lead to true freedom. That independence is both a physical and spiritual discipline. And Walden Pond is, a manifesto of Americanism, essentially. I mean, this country is the greatest country on earth. And it was birthed out of the courage of nonconformists, a group of guys who stood up for what they believed in, and they were willing to risk their complete existence on that truth, sign their death warrants. So our country's legacy is pure individualism. And this is a manifesto, a continuation of that spirit of Americanism. So that's the big question. Am I truly living or just existing? Existing's comfortable, for sure. And nobody's going to fuck with you, really. But, so just some quotes from Walden. I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life, and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived.
Sounds like regret.
Regret. This is the summary of what he was doing.
What I had to teach. See if I could not learn
what it had to teach. What is nature trying to tell us that we just haven't ever stopped to listen? Everybody good on this? I'll send you guys the presentation. We'll send it. Or you take a photo?
I'm just taking photos because I have it.
Yeah. I'll also send this to everybody.
Appreciate that.
Rather than love, than money, than fame, give me truth. What's real? What kind of illusions have I been living in? Where am I lying to myself?
Truth invites conflict, though, by its very nature, right? Because when confronted with the truth, you have to decide whether you're pro or against with the truth. Truth is like a lion, right? If you let it free, it will defend itself, right? So you don't need to protect truth necessarily. But when someone's like, "This is a truth," now comes the defense on is it true or not. You have to test truth to know it's true.
Yeah, and that's the action of the philosopher. Is make your argument in support or defense, and support or contradiction to whatever is being proposed. That's the work of the philosopher, is what you just described. And that T should be so if I'm that T should be a capital T. By the way, keep that in mind. It's not a lowercase t.
What's the difference between love and truth? It's like,
Great question.
it's like truth is a great love, like a greater love to me, but
I think that we could philosophize about that all day. I think that, if I'm going to throw some out there, Thoreau he's removing himself from society. That means he's essentially taken himself out of the economy. He does handiwork to buy bread and shit, but he's removing himself from the economy. He's removing himself from the social spheres, and he's not dating. Chicks aren't coming to your cabin, bro.
How do you know?
Maybe he left it out of the book. The whole time he's just got these girls coming through. So he's a handyman.
Starts writing about it, the flow will stop.
So I would say that what he means here is the body's desire for romance and the satisfaction that it gives to the senses.
Yeah, I also imagine walking through the streets during that time would be kind of like now, because you had newspapers promoting some agenda, trying to sell a product, someone on the street yelling, trying to get you to buy their shoes, and it's like, oh, this consumerism, all this shit doesn't matter anymore. He's like, just put me in a fucking cabin.
Put me in a fucking cabin, dude.
There's also the assumption that truth exists. That is very loud to me, because if you take that away, then you can't get to that.
That would be the conversation about. I mean, if God exists, if God does not exist, then this is all subjective. None of it matters. The T is lowercase.
Right.
If there is a divine force that is incomprehensible, is the source of all things, then the T is capitalized. Even though we can't really know its essence, we see reflections of it around us. In the trees, in our friends. You guys have read this one, hopefully.
Quiet desperation.
The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. Probably one of the most famous quotes from that book. I have nothing to add to it.
Brilliant. I would add, and I might be one of them.
Yeah.
I
Well,
should
Homework got quiet. We all started feeling desperate.
Yeah, we're like, oh man.
Let's not be quiet about it then. Okay?
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's what kind of illusions am I living in? Where am I tricking myself? Where am I comfortable, getting complacent? These are just the questions that I ask myself constantly, every single day. What am I tricking myself out of doing today? And it gets worse when the media is constantly telling you that you're bad for being a man.
Yep.
Or they can men can get pregnant. Yep.
Or men can get pregnant. Men aren't getting pregnant.
Yeah, like crazy these days. That's possible.
Let's not get distracted by those super ass fringe topics.
Yeah, that could be another retreat.
It seems fringe, but for some reason. So,
Yeah.
this is the final slide. Am I truly living or just existing?
How do you measure that? You say, okay, I want to make sure I leave this retreat. Am I truly living or just existing? Well, I think like maybe I'm existing, so I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna be different. I think it's difficult to know how far you're moving along that.
Is living the pursuit of the self, in a sense? Is that what that's referring to? Like doing something for finding you, discovering you, and working through that flow state as we talked about earlier? Or is it?
I think that when he says living, he means living a life that is coming from within and not from society's expectations.
Yeah. Being a nonconformist.
Being a
fulfilling
nonconformist.
what you and maybe your God knows is your destiny without any regrets.
To your idea, prayer, taking the time to listen, like for me, if I'm not living right, I know. I'm not, if I'm really off track, like I may trick myself for a little bit, but when I'm sitting down for an hour or 30 minutes meditating, like it hits me in the face. So I think a lot of it is giving ourselves the space to hear that voice and to experience that guidance from above or within. I think that if we're constantly distracting ourselves, which is really easy to do. I mean, if I could wake up, get on Instagram, and like go all day without actually thinking like a single thought. I could just work, I could get on Instagram, then I could, you know, make food, go work, get on like, I could go the whole day without any silence whatsoever if I really wanted to. If I did that over and over and over and over again, I'm gonna be fucked up. Like, I'm not gonna have any time to actually get any feedback from my higher self. So I think that's a big part of this, is giving ourselves the space to get that feedback from above or within.
For me, like, the times where I feel like I'm truly living, I'm in a state of immense gratitude. Whereas if I'm taking things for granted or I'm not in a state of gratitude, I'm just existing, you know?
Yeah, that's...
whether that's meditation or a state of prayer, that's my experience, something that I've noticed a difference in between living and existing. Finding that gratitude.
Yeah, I agree, Matt. I mean, for me, like, if I'm grateful, I feel pretty good. Like, if I really practice gratitude, like I pray gratitude, anxiety, fear just kind of washes away. But if I catch myself not being grateful, then I'm like realizing that I'm trying to do it my way, in a way that's not really in tune with any sort of higher. Yeah, that's gratitude. I think that's like maybe even like an indicator. Like, do you feel grateful? And then the changes that happen in my life when I start being grateful, things change, for sure.
Yeah, like when you're in nature, what are some of the feelings you have? I mean, it's one of just wow, thank you, God, for making this so beautiful. How'd you do this?
Yep.
You know?
It's gratitude, it's awe.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm a big, if I could put awe in a vitamin and sell it, I think everybody needs a daily dose of awe. Like something that puts you in a state of awe. For me, it's nature, it's beautiful architecture, it's beautiful music, it's reading beautiful literature, things that are just so beyond what my tiny brain is capable of. I know that it's making me better just by sitting with it. So I think that awe and gratitude are probably, nearly synonymous, I'd say.
This is kind of a call for action with the truly living and truly existing. But the neat thing about, like, for instance, Walden, we are very comfortable as a society when you are living rough in the field, in nature, camping, whatever, right? Your decisions, you have a much shorter cycle on whether that is important. Is that a waste of energy, right? Because you'll sit around and waste time all day, right?
Yeah.
You're watching TV, playing a game, or you're talking about Karen, because you can, right? You got bills on auto pay, climate control, everything else. But when you're sitting there going, well, I'm gonna be cold enough, I'll go get some firewood.
Yeah.
If I don't get this prep. And so in this particular case, I would say, especially anytime you're doing any kind of retreat or anything like this, you get that motivated thing, you're like, am I living, am I existing? And I'm like, that's awesome, and da-da-da. And whereas Thoreau had his, and Emerson, they had their kind of, we could use nature, and, people use church or religion as a callback. Everyone needs that sort of fellowship check-in piece with it because, men will sharpen men as iron sharpens iron, right? Like, are you living or are you existing? Because what'll happen is your brain, there's this little piece in your brain that loves anything that's ever made you feel good. Dopamine, whatever, you're like, ooh, I like that, serotonin, ooh, that's good, I like that. And it will just convince you that, hey, you just want to keep doing that stuff. And it's easy to go from I'm living to I'm kind of existing and it feels okay. And you can re-challenge that by these type of retreats where you meet other people like, oh, you know what, you're right, maybe I should. Now, in the past, that's been I'm communing, or I'm regularly going to church, or I'm a part of a fraternal organization, or whatever. But because we have a social component to what it is being human, most people need to have a check-in with somebody else. And so I think it's important to have that periodic check, how are you doing? I'm doing okay. What are you doing? All right. Is that living or is that existing? I don't know. And because you compare notes, that's how you get that mirror to yourself. Because left to your own device, you just be like, I had no idea what I was doing.
1000%. Like, I'm a big advocate for myself. I have some friends that I'll call and I'll just be like, dude, what have I been doing wrong these past few months? Like, I need an accountability check-in. Like, tell me where I've been being an asshole. Because we're so blind to the mistakes that we make. So I have like a few friends that I just call like every few months and hit them with that question. And they're like, all right, well, da-da-da-da. And I get like a check-in list, you know? And I think it's important to have guys like that. I mean, maybe, you know, there's some in this room that you can connect with. But having somebody you can just call like once a quarter and hit him with that question, like, I need just pure, unfiltered accountability, feedback on how I've been showing up in life. And every time I do that, I always learn something that I haven't been noticing in how I've been acting.